In this video, we're going to take a look at the different types of data that Command PE can produce. First of all, whenever you're doing anything with data, you have to keep in mind that what is your end result going to be? We have a wide variety of different things at your disposal, depending on what type of systems you have, what kind of networking you have, and what kind of software you have for the purposes of analyzing things later. But for the purpose of this video, we're just going to take a general overview of some of the different items that we have. First things first, the general formats that you have available for sending data out of Command include CSV files, which are simply comma-separated files, XML files, which will break everything down by individual property, TAC-View1 and TAC-View2, which will simply be visualizations of everything. Keep in mind with visualizations, we also have the ability to spit out information in the SIMDIS format for distributed information systems. We also have the ability to send all data out in the form of an MS Access database. We can connect to a SQL server directly, or we can create a SQL database. Keep in mind that you can send all these different types of data formats out at the same time. However, the more of those you create, the longer your scenarios are going to take to execute for the purposes of generating the data itself. Now that we've taken a look at that, let's take a look at the other options we have as far as going ahead and exporting data. Each one of our scenarios can go ahead and spit all this information out, ranging from sensor detection success. For example, do we actually succeed at detecting something with any type of sensor? Sensor detection failures is going to be the opposite. For example, if something is in range and we're not able to detect it because it doesn't have a strong enough signature return, that will show up on this file versus this file. We have the ability to export anytime any type of weapon is fired. The end game for any weapon, including weapons that will run out of fuel or simply crash into the ground. We have the ability to export constantly the position of every single unit in the entire world over time. We have the ability to show the UDA cycle, which is going to show, when is it orienting, how long does it take to target. We have the ability to show when any sort of targets have been destroyed, including weapons. We have the ability to show any sort of a fuel that is consumed, so broken down by type of fuel. We'll take a look at that in a moment. We also have the ability to show any type of fuel transfer in the event that you're doing some kind of unrep or you're doing some kind of aerial refueling. We also have the ability to show any air operations that can be launches or recoveries of any type of aircrafts. We can also show docking operations, which is going to be the exact same thing, only with ships. And of course, we have the ability to take all the different data that we select and put it into a single piece. Note whenever you're working with a single piece that CSVs tend to come split up into the individual categories. In this case, you can see a little operation that we ran earlier showing you some of the different options that we can have here. You can see that we can split them down by side, we can split them down by type, and we can even break them down into different formats as well. Now note when you move to different types of file formats, you're going to have different options as far as what you can export. In this particular case, if we're doing XML, we have most of the data that we have up above, only it's going to be in an individual format. Some MS Access database output, so we're also going to have very, very similar information, but we're going to require MS Access for the purposes of actually going into it. Now, where it gets a little bit more sophisticated is when we're looking at the SQL Server and SQLite settings. This gives us the ability to real-time send data onto a network. If we want to do that, we can dictate the batch size, we can dictate the different times they use, all the different options that we're going to be exporting. Keep in mind, if we're using SQLite as well, we have to have some kind of a connection string that we're going to be using for the purpose of connecting to our server. As soon as you start up any sort of SQLite server settings, you have to make sure your server is going to be enabled and all the network connections are set up prior to trying to run a simulation, or it will give you errors. So now that we've taken a look at some of the different things we can export, let's take a look at what the actual data can look like. So over here, we have a table of all the different weapons that were fired in a particular scenario opened up into a Microsoft Excel. Now that we have all this information, we can do things such as sort it. Let's go ahead and say we are only interested in a particular type of weapon. Ooh. There are no 2A2s, but I believe there's some SA2s. And now we can study individually what happened. We have information such as where the target was, how far away was the target, what is the slant distance, what is the altitude. We can even determine the consequences of this particular weapon as well. We also have the ability to take a look at things such as what fuel was consumed. So in this case, we'll go back into Excel here. We'll go ahead and bring this over. And now we can study each different types of fuel as well as the different type of fuel quantity used over time with a unique time ID, a unique unit ID, as well as the fuel type. So in the case that we're doing some sort of logistical work, we can actually come through and analyze that as well. Now, the other options you have at your disposal, depending on what you need here, is also going to include a summary of everything that happened with all the different iterations of the scenario that you ran. In this particular case, we have a list of all of our losses broken down by sides, as well as expenditures, as well as losses and expenditures for the other side. If there were any scoring involving during the scenario, we would also see a hint at that. In addition to that piece of information, we're also provided with a message log, should we desire, that will break down each individual event inside the entire scenario by timeline, not, of course, disaggregated into the individual tables. This provides us with a good idea of kind of what happened at what time so that we can study all the different events that take place in a scenario. All these different data types are selectable. We can choose which ones we want to turn on and off. We can choose which ones we wish to consolidate, and we can, of course, do work with them later on.